welcome to the Louie File. I was wanting to share with you a little bit more about the Bible's idea about sanctification. You know, in the Old Testament, there are so many cool stories, and the stories in and of themselves are, we have to by faith believe and take them as fact and historical happenings. But there's also always this thread of insight in the spirit that comes with it. And that's sometimes what I like to look at and to share. Today I wanted to share with you something that comes out of the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 5, we see a story about a king named Belshazzar, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it says, I'm just going to read some verses here. Daniel 5 verse 1, Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that they had taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. The king called aloud to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, "Any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck, and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. Whoa. Now I'm not going to read any more, but I will tell you this. Eventually Daniel came in, and he interpreted what the writing on the wall said. And basically what it said was to King Belshazzar, "You've been weighed in the balance, and you've been found wanting." Oh my. So it didn't turn out so well for old King Belshazzar in the end. You know, the story for me is pretty amazing, but the implication about sanctification is what I wanted you to see. You see, what he did was he took these vessels from the temple of God that were set apart for a purpose, holy vessels, sanctified vessels that were meant to be used in the worship of the one true God. And Belshazzar sent his men to go get these vessels, and he used them to party it up and worship the gods of gold and stone and silver. So God said that as enough of that. So a hand showed up and told him, "You're in trouble now, buddy. You have taken what was designed and meant to be holy, and you've used them for unholy purposes." You see, that's what the enemy has done to mankind as a whole. You see, God created Adam and set him apart into a garden for a designer, for a purpose, to fulfill something that God had in mind for mankind to fulfill. And the serpent slithered in there and pulled mankind out of his purposes and began using him for his own purposes. You see, the Apostle Paul even called us vessels. And in Romans 9, it talks about some vessels for honor and some for dishonor. But you know what? Ultimately, the point is that in Christ we are set apart as his vessel, and he has a purpose and a plan for us in this world. And it's a holy purpose and plan. So, as a non-believer, we're being used and abused. Our vessel is being used and abused by the enemy in a wrongful way. And then as we become born again and God sanctifies us, makes us holy, and sets us apart again for his purposes, sometimes we can get distracted and led astray and stumble into being used once again for the wrong purposes. You know, the Apostle Paul said in Romans 6, he says, so stop. You know, since you've been crucified and buried and raised back to life, joined to Christ, stop presenting yourself, your members, your bodies, as instruments of unrighteousness or as weapons or vessels of unrighteousness, but rather present yourself to God for his purposes. as one that's alive from the dead. Isn't that great? See, so you see that God has a plan for mankind as a whole, and He has a plan for you as an individual, and that is that you would be a vessel for honor. You would be set apart for His purposes. And that mean old Belshazzar that was misusing the vessels had to pay a price. And you can rest assured that Satan one day is going to pay the ultimate price for his misuse of us too. But right now, in the meantime, I'm telling you, be set apart for His purposes. Invite Christ to move into your life if He hasn't yet. And if He has, turn your eyes to Him and see yourself as His vessel. And see yourself as Him operating you for a set purpose, which is for holy and blameless use, for a higher purpose than just a mere earthly level purpose. But we have a heavenly spiritual purpose that we are fulfilling in Christ. All right, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching.